There is a place on this continent where, by every rule we think we understand about the natural world, water simply should not be. It is the hottest place ever reliably recorded on the face of the earth, a furnace of a valley where summer temperatures climb past 120 degrees and the ground itself can grow hot enough to cook an egg. It is the driest place in North America, a land that in a typical year receives barely a couple of inches of rain, sometimes far less, sometimes none at all for a year at a stretch. And it is the lowest place on the continent, a great basin sunk far below sea level, where the air presses down thick and heavy and the salt lies crusted white across the cracked and barren floor. This is Death Valley. And recently, it did something that should not have been possible. Across the lowest point of this scorched and lifeless basin, in the very place that holds the record as one of the driest, hottest spots on the planet, a lake appeared. Not a puddle, not a shallow film of muddy water quickly swallowed by the sun. A real, shimmering, navigable lake stretching for miles across the valley floor. Deep enough and broad enough that people came from far away simply to witness it, and some of them did the most improbable thing imaginable in the driest place in North America. They launched boats. They paddled kayaks across the surface of a lake that by all logic had no business existing at all, in a basin whose very name is a warning about the absence of water and the presence of death. In this video, we are going to explore exactly what happened, how a lake came to fill the driest, hottest, lowest place on the continent, and why it truly is something that should not, under ordinary circumstances, be possible. We will uncover the extraordinary chain of events that conjured this phantom lake out of a landscape defined by its absence of water. We will journey back in time to discover that this impossible lake is actually the ghost of something ancient, a haunting echo of a vanished world. And we will consider what this strange and beautiful event tells us about our planet, about the power of rare extremes, and about a place that, just when we thought we understood it, revealed that it can still astonish us. Stay with me to the end, because the story of how water returned to Death Valley is stranger and more wonderful than you might imagine. Hashtag the most extreme place in North America. To understand why a lake in Death Valley is so astonishing, you first have to understand just how extreme this place truly is, because it is a landscape of superlatives. A place that seems almost designed to be inhospitable to water and to life. Death Valley sits in a deep trough in the earth, a long, narrow basin walled in by tall mountain ranges on either side, and the floor of that basin drops to the lowest point anywhere in North America, a place that lies well below the level of the distant sea. Standing on that valley floor, you are standing at the bottom of the continent. That extreme depth is part of what makes the place so brutally hot. The valley acts like a trap for heat. Sunlight pours down onto the barren floor and heats the ground ferociously. The hot air rises, but it is hemmed in by the surrounding mountains, and as it circulates and sinks back down into the deep basin, it is compressed and heated even further, creating a natural oven that bakes the valley to temperatures almost beyond human endurance. It is here that some of the highest air temperatures ever measured on Earth have been recorded, a heat so intense that it can be genuinely deadly to anyone caught out in it without water and shelter. And the valley is not just hot, it is desperately dry. The same mountains that trap the heat also wring the moisture out of the air before it can ever reach the valley floor. Storms rolling in from the ocean are forced up and over the ranges, and as they rise, they cool and drop their rain on the far side, so that by the time whatever is left descends into Death Valley, it has been squeezed almost completely dry. This is why the valley receives so pitifully little rain, why its floor is a cracked expanse of salt and barren earth, and why the very idea of a lake forming there seems to defy everything the place is known for. Death Valley is in almost every sense the last place on the continent you would ever expect to find yourself looking out across open water. Hashtag the impossible lake. And yet, that is exactly what happened. Across the lowest basin of this most extreme of landscapes, water gathered and spread until it formed a genuine lake, a sheet of shimmering water lying across the salt flats where, just before, there had been nothing but the dry, crusted white of the barren valley floor. To anyone who knew the place, the sight was almost impossible to believe. A mirage made real, a body of water lying serenely in the heart of the driest, hottest place in North America. The lake was no mere trace of dampness. It spread for miles across the valley floor, a vast, flat expanse of water reflecting the sky and the surrounding mountains in a way that transformed the entire character of the landscape. Where before there had been a harsh, blinding plain of salt, now there was a serene mirror. The mountains doubled in its surface, the clouds drifting across its still face. The transformation was so complete and so beautiful that it drew visitors from great distances, people who wanted to see with their own eyes the water that had appeared in a place synonymous with its absence. And then came the truly astonishing part. The lake was deep enough, in places, and broad enough that people were able to take to it in small boats and kayaks, gliding across the surface of a lake in the middle of a desert, paddling over the lowest point in North America, floating above the salt flats that are among the driest ground on the planet. Imagine the strangeness of it. To be sitting in a kayak, dipping a paddle into cool water, surrounded by the vast desert emptiness, in a valley whose name and reputation are built entirely on the deadly absence of exactly the thing you are floating upon. It was a scene that seemed to belong to another world, or to a dream, and yet it was real, captured in countless images that spread far and wide, precisely because they were so impossible to reconcile with everything the place is supposed to be. Hashtag, how the impossible happened. So how did it happen? How did a lake come to fill a basin that is one of the driest places on Earth? The answer lies in an extraordinary convergence of events, a rare alignment of circumstances that had to come together in just the right way to conjure water out of a landscape defined by its scarcity. And understanding it reveals something fascinating about how these extreme places actually work. The first ingredient was rain, and not just a little of it, but an enormous and unusual amount for a place that normally sees almost none. Powerful storm systems, the kind that carry vast quantities of moisture, swept into the region and unleashed rainfall far beyond anything the valley normally receives, dropping in a short span what might otherwise take a very long time to accumulate, if it ever accumulated at all. In a landscape so unaccustomed to water, such a deluge is a shock to the entire system, overwhelming the dry ground's ability to absorb it. But rain alone, even a great deal of it, does not usually create a lasting lake, because in most places the water flows away, running off into rivers and streams that carry it out to the sea. And here is where the peculiar geography of Death Valley becomes crucial. The valley is what is known as a closed basin, meaning it has no outlet, no river leading out, nowhere for the water to go. Every drop of rain that falls within the vast watershed of the surrounding mountains, and all the water that runs down off those slopes, flows inward and downward toward the lowest point. And there it collects, with no way to escape. So when an extraordinary volume of water fell across the region, it did not drain away. It pooled in the deepest part of the basin, gathering into the lake that so astonished everyone who saw it. The very feature that makes the valley such a perfect trap for heat, its deep, enclosed, outlet-less basin, is the same feature that allowed it to become, however briefly, a trap for water. Hashtag, the ghost of an ancient world here is where the story becomes truly haunting, because this impossible lake was not entirely new. In a very real sense, it was the return of something ancient, the ghost of a vast body of water that once filled this valley in a world very different from our own. The temporary lake that appeared and amazed everyone was a faint, fleeting echo of a great lake that existed here long ago, in a distant age when the climate of this region was profoundly different. Long, long ago, in a wetter and cooler era, this same basin held an enormous lake, a deep and expansive body of water that filled the valley from wall to wall and lay hundreds of feet deep, a great inland sea in a landscape that was then far from the furnace it is today. For a long span of time, this ancient lake was a permanent feature of the region, its waters home to life, its shorelines marking the edges of a world that has since vanished almost without a trace. But as the climate shifted and the region grew steadily hotter and drier over the ages, that great lake began to shrink. The water evaporated faster than it could be replenished, the shorelines retreated, and eventually the vast lake dwindled away to nothing, leaving behind only the salt it had carried. Spread across the valley floor, as the crusted white expanse we see today. That salt is, in effect, the mineral skeleton of the ancient lake, all that remains of the water that once filled the basin. And so, when the extraordinary rains came, and water gathered once more in the deepest part of the basin, it was as if the ancient lake had stirred back to life, briefly and faintly. A shadow of its former self rising again in the very place where it had died so long ago. The impossible lake that people kayaked upon was walking in the footsteps of a giant, occupying the same low ground that a mighty ancient lake had filled ages before. To stand at the edge of the temporary lake was, in a sense, to look back through time, to catch a glimpse of what this valley had once been. Before the heat and the dryness claimed it, the ghost of the ancient world had returned, if only for a moment. Hashtag, why it shouldn't be possible now, we can understand fully why this event is described as something that should not be possible, because it required a defiance of the very forces that define Death Valley. Everything about this place is arranged to prevent exactly what happened. The heat is arranged to evaporate any water almost instantly. The dryness is arranged to ensure that water rarely arrives at all. The whole reputation and reality of the valley is built on the near total absence of standing water. For a lake to form and persist there, even for a while, the ordinary rules had to be broken. Consider the forces working against the lake even as it lay there shimmering. In that blistering heat, evaporation is merciless. The sun and the hot, dry air are constantly pulling moisture up out of any water, and in a place as hot as Death Valley, that process is dramatically accelerated. A body of water lying exposed on that valley floor is under relentless assault from the heat. Its water being drawn away into the sky with astonishing speed. For a lake to exist there at all, the amount of water delivered had to be great enough, and delivered fast enough to overwhelm even that ferocious evaporation, at least temporarily. It was a race between the water that had gathered and the heat that sought to erase it, and for a brief window, the water won. And that is exactly why the lake could not last. This was never a permanent return of the ancient sea. From the moment it formed, the lake was doomed, its fate sealed by the very nature of the place it occupied. The relentless heat and the dry air went to work, and slowly, steadily, the water began to retreat. The lake grew shallower and smaller, its edges creeping inward. Its shimmering expanse shrinking day by day as the desert reclaimed what had so briefly been taken from it. The window in which one could paddle a kayak across the lowest point in North America was fleeting, a rare and temporary gift, and everyone who witnessed it understood that they were seeing something that would soon be gone, swallowed back into the salt and the heat, leaving the valley once again to its ancient arid silence. The impossibility of the lake was written into its very existence, a thing that could happen only rarely and only briefly before the fundamental character of the place reasserted itself. Hashtag what the impossible lake tells us. An event like this is more than just a beautiful curiosity, more than a strange and wonderful spectacle. It carries meaning, and it teaches us something about the world we live in and the nature of the extraordinary places within it. The return of water to Death Valley, however brief, is a reminder that our planet is capable of astonishing extremes and remarkable surprises. That even the places we think we understand completely can still confound our expectations. One of the lessons is about the power of rare, extreme events. Most of the time, Death Valley behaves exactly as its reputation suggests, hot and dry and lifeless. But every so often, the ingredients align in an unusual way, an extraordinary storm, an exceptional volume of rain, and the landscape is briefly transformed into something that seems to violate its own nature. These rare events, though they come only occasionally, are part of the true character of the place, a reminder that a landscape is defined not only by its ordinary state, but by the extremes it is capable of reaching. The valley is not only the hottest, driest place on the continent. It is also, on the rarest of occasions, a place where a lake can shimmer and boats can sail, and both of these truths belong to it. There is also a deeper resonance in the way the temporary lake echoed the ancient one. It is a vivid reminder that the landscapes around us are not fixed and eternal, but are the products of vast, slow changes over enormous spans of time. The barren, salt-crusted floor of Death Valley was once the bed of a great lake, and the fleeting return of water there connects the present moment to that deep past, showing us that the same basin has known both worlds, the wet and the dry, the lake and the desert. It invites us to see the landscape not as a static thing, but as a story still unfolding, shaped by forces far larger and far older than ourselves. And perhaps most simply, an event like this reminds us of the sheer wonder of the natural world, of its capacity to surprise and delight us, to take a place synonymous with death and absence, and, for a brief and shining moment, fill it with water and reflection, and even the improbable sight of people paddling across it in the sun. There is something profoundly moving in the idea that even the most extreme and unforgiving place on the continent can, under the right rare circumstances, become something unexpectedly beautiful. Hashtag, when the desert comes alive there, is another side to these rare pulses of water, one that unfolds not on the surface of the lake, but in the soil around it. And it is just as astonishing in its own quiet way. Because water in Death Valley does not only fill the basin, it awakens life that had been waiting, sometimes for years, hidden and dormant in the parched ground. The desert, for all its apparent lifelessness, is not truly dead. It is patient, holding its life in reserve, biding its time until the rare moment when the water finally comes. Across the desert floor and the slopes around the valley lie the seeds of countless wildflowers, scattered through the dry soil and waiting, sometimes for a very long time, for enough rain to give them their chance. Most years, that chance never arrives. But when an extraordinary volume of rain falls, the kind of rain that can conjure a lake in the basin below, it can also trigger something rare and magnificent on the surrounding land, an eruption of color as the long-waiting seeds burst into life. In the wake of exceptional rains, parts of this stark landscape can be transformed into carpets of blossoms, a spectacle so vivid and so rare that it draws people from far away, much as the lake itself did. It is a profound reminder that the water which fills the impossible lake is the same water that brings the desert briefly, gloriously to life, and that both are gifts of the same rare and extraordinary event. Hashtag, the lake that was and will be again. So Death Valley did something that should not be possible. In the hottest, driest, lowest place in North America, in a basin whose very name is a byword for lifelessness and the deadly absence of water, a lake appeared, spread across the salt flats, reflected the mountains and the sky, and carried boats and kayaks across its improbable surface. It was the ghost of an ancient lake returning for a moment to the ground it had ruled long ago, conjured by a rare and extraordinary alignment of storm and rain and the peculiar geography of a closed basin with nowhere for the water to go. And then, as the merciless heat and the dry air went to work, it began to vanish, shrinking day by day back into the salt and silence from which it had so briefly emerged. But here is the thing to hold on to. Though the lake could not last, its story is not truly over, because the conditions that created it, however rare, are part of the deep pattern of this place. Water has come to Death Valley before, in the great ancient lake, and in the occasional temporary pools that have gathered over the centuries, and water will come again, one day, when the ingredients align once more. The valley will spend the vast majority of its time as the scorched and barren place we know, and then, on some rare occasion in the future, the storms will roll in, the rain will fall, the basin will fill. And once again, a lake will shimmer where no lake should be. It is a rhythm measured not in days, but in years and decades and longer, a slow and patient cycle in which the impossible becomes, briefly, real. That is the strange and beautiful truth of Death Valley. It is a place of absolutes, of the most extreme heat and dryness on the continent. And yet it holds within it the memory and the potential of water, a ghost of an ancient lake sleeping beneath the salt, waiting for the rare moment when it can rise again. What happened there was not a violation of nature, but a revelation of it, a reminder that the natural world is deeper, stranger, and more full of wonder than we often allow ourselves to imagine. The driest place in North America became, for a moment, a lake. It should not have been possible, and yet it happened, and one day, when the conditions are right, it will happen again.